Go ahead and call this workshop to order.
Special meeting.
Special meeting? Okay. I'll call this special meeting to order. I stand corrected. And I am going to let, since she just handed everything, you just want to go over what the changes that you made, what you handed and put in front of us? She's like, oh crap, I was eating.
We have a new summary from the last meeting. You'll see your new totals, and then also figured out the budget, ordinance. You all will have a public hearing on it.
That makes it easy. What was our tax rate last year and what's our adopted tax rate this year? I might.
The advertisement is, or the amount that we have on here is high. We know it's gonna come in lower, but we would have a higher rate because we don't have, savings for budget.
Tax cuts. Okay.
Right.
Yes.
So I see where performance increase pools have all been zeroed and then the positions have been given increases. Was it decided that we would just give the increase instead of putting it in the performance increase pool?
That was what we requested last.
So everybody gets 3%?
Goes right to, on their salary come January 1.
That's what was requested for the change from the last meeting.
In the past, the department heads have always had the discretion of using a performance increase to award people based on performance, not just blanket increases. They could give up to 5% to employees that exceed their expectations and less than 3% if it's an unsatisfactory employee. I just wonder what prompted that change.
Nathan, you want to address that? You were the one that brought up about performance pool.
I can. There's some, it feels like there's some lack of consistency, not in the evaluations. So I believe everybody's being evaluated, they're supposed to be being evaluated. But just in some of the increases didn't come across as they were being appropriately or adequately taken care of, and the department heads were for sure getting themselves their increases. And there was some questions about the different amounts that were in the line items for each employee. So we just threw out the idea, well, what if we just do a blanket one this year and just try to figure out how to address the evaluations and performance evaluations, because it never really has worked like it was hoped or intended to work. At least that's the perception. And so we were going to get with the administration and Kim, try to figure out, is there a way to fix it, or is there a way to be halfway consistent because government does not operate like a private business. So that's some of the thoughts.
Is the administration on board with this change?
Administration prefers
Right. Okay.
One of the things that I have seen in the past when it comes to performance, it creates dissension within some departments. You give one person a higher performance rating than you do the other person, well then that other person starts to be, in some instances, can become negative and not want to perform their job as good as they should.
Well, I think that should be motivation for them to have a higher performance. I mean, unless we're talking about there being a bias with what performance increases were.
Well, that could happen in some situations.
I think those decisions should be made by the administration and the department heads rather than the council that isn't ingrained in day-to-day activities. But it's just my opinion.
The 3% across the board, I thought was decided on since there was a mistake made in the first, they were off. There was discrepancies in calculations of the performance pool. And then there was 7% in police and fire.
honestly, on one of the stages, the whole budget was the mayor's office. Bonus we gave the mayor performance.
No. That's not right, but they were mistakes.
Yeah, how much, I mean mistakes, we're talking about last year's budget or this year's, or both budgets?
Proposed the budget.
For both budgets.
I don't know.
I pointed them out. I mean, I highlighted them.
Proposed budget, so we just do away with the performance-based.
And I don't know, and somebody mentioned that there was 7% somewhere. I mean, if that's what budgeted by the administration, the policy says that someone can get up to 7%.
Mayor can give up to 7%.
So we've always budgeted 3% in each department as a council because it's been left to us to do. But if the administration's putting forth budgets that are revenue neutral and they decide they're going to give 7% in one department and 4% in another department, that's their prerogative.
My department never had the opportunity of doing that.
Of submitting a budget?
No, of the percentage.
You know, you've never gotten the percentage increases for your employees?
Mine has always been 3% is all I was ever given to give to my employees. And I've
They
had
always-
employees that's always performed that I couldn't go past that.
I see.
There's been various times that the council's given a flat raise. It has not, I mean, we've moved towards the performance, but there's been times we said flat $1,000 or whatever. I mean,
And that's fine, I just think as administration, we need to know, I mean, if we're not gonna do the performance-based raises, then we're not gonna go through this performance evaluation. I mean, that's a lot of work from the administration standpoint and also HR. That's fine, we can go, I mean,
I think some of the discussion, I think, was just for this year, and I think that's a discussion some of us wanted to have, is like, going forward, do we want to change something if it's not working, or some people don't think it's working? Maybe we need to talk about that.
I think one reason why it got deferred is because we only budget 3% for performance for a department. That doesn't leave a whole lot of leeway to either, reward good employees. Only 3%.
That's what,
Allow, if you have a small department, two employees, I only have one employee. There's not a whole lot of leeway. But obviously, the larger departments, they have much more larger amounts to go. So, I mean, I was just under the impression that, it was implemented years ago as council to make it performance-based as opposed to just picking and choosing or just flat across the board.
no, it'll,
It makes it easier on.
yeah, but it'll be a series of meetings. What it was is usually budgeted at 3%. But when he was looking at performance pool, he says each department was budgeted 3%, some were 3%, some were, they were different. A matter of fact, building commissioners wasn't 3%, they were 9%
Wouldn't
or,
the easier way to deal with that, if that's the case, just pass a budget that has a 3% performance goal, instead of just going performance goals out the window, going over into the 100 series where everybody automatically gets 3% raise.
But there was more discussions than that, though. That's the only one that's being brought up mostly here, but there was other discussions too. Like, for example, Mr. Ellis worked for the city before, saw employees who worked really hard. I mean, every day they picked up garbage, they showed up, picked up garbage. I mean, do they have a goal of how many tips they make, as far as how many baskets they put in the garbage? To say, well, he picked up, 300 pounds more than this guy did? Or it's hard to judge some of the jobs that you have based on jobs that are just repetitive grass cutting jobs or garbage tipping jobs. And then, but at the end of the day, there was people who got paid more or less, and it was hard to judge, other than maybe from a political standpoint, that politics came into play. That was part of the discussion, and I'm not saying that happens or it didn't happen, but that's part of the discussion that we had. So, you know what, maybe this time we'll go flat and maybe address or talk about some of these issues for future budgets.
Well, I was in favor of just a flat rate increase of just, like I say, $1,000 or whatever, and give a flat rate increase across the board rather than a percentage increase, because when you do a percentage increase, it's still those at the top, those that's getting the most continue to get that much more than those down at the bottom.
well, it was they just decided, well, it was decided 3% across the board till we can have some conversations. Nothing's being done away with, might need to be tweaked. There was just where he was calculating performance pools that he just saw some discrepancies, and I guess it was
And that just
decided
kind of
it just to be fair, so we could have discussions with HR and the administrative and the council members, that we would just do 3% and add it to their salary, their 411s.
Because that was our intent, that's what we thought, it was 3% across the board.
Between discrepancies and having a philosophical difference into performance-based pay raises.
Right.
And last year, up until this year, that's what was fine.
Sure.
In the South, I mean, I'll be blunt, I am saying, like, me, what the problem is some people didn't like how certain department heads divvied up their pool, so therefore we're going to do away with it and just do across the board 3%, which is fine. But
I didn't get that impression. I thought it was what you were telling.
Department heads are better suited to determine who should get those raises as opposed to if we're going to do performance.
And if one department or another decides to shift their budget in order to have a larger performance increase pool, up to that 7% that's allowed by policy, then I don't think that they should be penalized for doing so if it falls in line with keeping the budget balanced or revenue neutral, or however it is. I think the clerk's office should be able to put in for that full 7% if she chooses to. I mean,
Well, and that was the point. One of the points was, I was assuming, and I assumed wrong, because every year I would put it in not knowing that some people were getting 7%. Last year, I didn't even have enough to give 3% across, and you all had to do an additional appropriation. This has been going on. My salaries and my performance increase pool since I started in 2012 have always constantly been messed up.
been low.
No, they've been messed up.
Okay.
We just caught another one.
I don't think we're trying to take away from department heads. I think we're just supposed to be fair, trying to be fair until we can have a series of meetings with HR and administration and go from there. Which, if you would have been, those of you who were at that workshop, unfortunately you weren't there to hear all the conversation, so.
Have a
That's
job.
not how I remember it, but How much did we cut from the performance pool?
I don't know, because I took all the changes all together. I didn't separate.
So whatever dollars are, that were in the performance pool, that it's now just a flat 3%, or those just going back into the general fund? They're not allocated for anything
No,
else?
it's on their 411.
The dollar
Their
amount
salary.
is the same, it's just
Yeah, I know that.
what line item you put the 3% in.
I know, but we're saying that some of the increase was 7% or 4%. So obviously there's some additional dollars there that are not included in this flat 3%. Where did those dollars go? Did they get moved to a different fund, or are they just going back into,
No, we don't move, we don't, it would, I mean, if you
they're just
look-
not allocated, I guess is my
Right,
question?
Right.
So we don't know how much additional unallocated dollars does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
And right
You-
now,
your question makes sense.
I haven't changed any of the revenues or anything like that, but at the moment, with the changes that you made from the past in the general fund, it's over the revenue by $511,000.
Okay, so just,
So I know 100,000 was from overtime from the police, and then I took out.
so all of the changes are, okay.
The other increases for the other department heads that were in there, and all the new employees that were in there, and I took
Okay,
all that, what you guys have decided, and then this is and I didn't say, oh, this is how much that was. And this is
That's
how
okay.
much is
You-
there.
that's okay.
What you just said about the 511,000, can you say that again?
So with all of the changes,
I gave you a new summary sheet?
Right? It's 511,702,000?
Yes, over the revenue. For 2000,
Based on what we've done over these past workshops.
yes.
So now we're in a deficit budget.
That was because we didn't appropriate.
Is that an
the
accurate
edit
understanding on my part?
Yes.
Because of the,
And the increase for-
doing the 800, that budgeting the 800,000 for
for the
the
increase
health
in-
insurance renewal. And then plus that, those edit dollars, last week we didn't appropriate the, which was what, 460?
450.
450? So actually, it's like 50,000.
Last
We
year,
would have appropriated that for healthcare, but we were like, gonna wait and see. We didn't appropriate it because we'd use it if we had to.
What were we waiting for? Why didn't we appropriate the 450,000 from edit?
I don't know, you tell me, you were at the same meeting as I was.
Well, I asked the question then, I didn't get an answer either.
Oh,
I thought I
you
heard
did?
you just say we were waiting to see, but then you didn't finish the sentence.
I thought we did all of it because you were saying that this year, see what money we have because it builds. And then we see how the circuit breakers are and all that. We may not have to use those edit dollars for it, but if they're there as a safeguard to be budgeted, because we didn't want to not budget health care. That was my understanding. Somebody can speak up
Are we
if they're not.
talking about the edit dollars this year that are unallocated, or are we talking about the edit dollars that are we're
Next
supposed
year.
to pay for the
We're
principal?
talking about next year.
It sounds like they're leaving the 450 unallocated so that they can allocate it later if they need it for the health
For
insurance.
health care, right.
Which I thought was what we proposed out of the general fund from the beginning. But, I mean,
No,
So
the
is all
health care just
800,000
came up last before workshop.
is all 800,000 budgeted in the general fund then?
Yes.
Okay. So the 400, no?
No, Rick?
yeah,
Yes.
it is.
Yeah, that's just
Okay.
511.
Okay.
We thought, because Scott took the lead, because he said you and him sat down and had a meeting, that's where it all came from, whatever you all sat and met, he had a whole list. Of course, unfortunately, he's not here, so that's what we took it from.
Well, Scott had a list of ideas on how to cut the budget to find the 800,000. But if we cut those things that he had listed out, we wouldn't be 500 grand in the hole.
Some of the items were not,
This levy,
yeah, it
this parks.
it wasn't an actual cut, it was anticipation of future fees, and then we were going to reallocate future fees that would come on board, so it really wasn't cutting anything. I forget what the item was, but they all weren't cuts.
Should be in the minutes.
Okay.
Lisa, you asked a question. Last year's tax rate that you all signed, was 2.1619.
So as it stands today, we're 500,000 in the hole, but we have 450,000 that's not allocated from edit.
And
Out of edit.
Which
So I mean, if we wanted to allocate it, we would, and then we'd only be 50,000 off. But nobody made the motion to allocate the edit for healthcare.
Those edit
And-
dollars were what we discussed going toward the Spring Street project, correct?
Correct.
they were originally for the Spring Street bond payment, and I thought we'd decided that we would find reserves, which somewhere I didn't see those in a set of workshop minutes, but I thought we'd talked about, there was the $1 million, and then we talked about doing away with the edit money and using it for insurance, and I thought somewhere we came up with 1.28 to offset those edit dollars to go towards Spring Street.
Right, Callie did those calculations.
Yeah, so our first conversation was the 1.45, which includes the edit, and then I recalculated the numbers to get a more exact number, and it ended up being 1.26.
2.6.
But since those,
And we were going to pull that all from the surplus, that's
But with the
right.
But since those
contingencies, we went up to 1.28.
Okay.
since that conversation, that's when we learned about the health renewal, the 800,000 more than 8.
That was all from the general fund for this year.
Right,
So it
That
has
wasn't
nothing to
for
do with
next
health-
year's
That's not
budget.
even part of this.
right.
Nothing to do with health renewal.
Okay, I'm caught up to speed now.
I thought we were talking about next year's budget.
Sorry, she threw in paying for Spring Street, and I
I
went off on a tangent.
I was thinking of our
My
conversation
apologies.
2 conversations ago about using IDA, but then I remember that we changed that, so, okay.
And the reason that comes up in the conversations for this year's budget is because,
The 450 is not appropriated anywhere.
Well, we ran out of time and we didn't get to appropriate, it. So if you want to make a appropriate it, go right ahead.
I think the reason no one, and no one made a motion to appropriate, and I think the thought was that that the council wanted to put that somewhere and not allocate it towards health insurance, because Mr. Dustin and some people believe that we're going to have the money anyway, so let's not tie it up to health insurance, but let's not spend it either. Let's just kind of put it into, I think Mr. Hawkins said something about just special projects or something, just a holding place, and see where we're at after circuit breakers come in and see where our revenues are 6 months from now or 6 months into next year.
Well, and I also remember a more philosophical argument about how we shouldn't be using operations costs from edit. Because I remember that being a discussion as well, that we don't want to set the precedent for paying for things like health insurance from edit dollars.
Right, that's why I wasn't allocated, wasn't that what, plus,
The
then
whole
we got to find
conversation is that we're going to
500,000.
use the edit. And I'm the one that brought up that I thought that this council didn't use it for operational. You all had decided you were going to use it for the operational purposes. There was no talk about setting it aside and waiting for circuit breakers. But this is like a made-up,
Surplus.
I'm the one that said there was going to be enough money without using edit. But
remember
no
you
one
said
was
that.
agreeing with me on that. Your all's idea was to use the 450 for the healthcare. That was exactly what you all were saying.
That was talked about, but yeah, motion never happened for it, but yeah.
Which leads me to believe all that talk was just covered just to try to defund the Spring Street project.
Wait a minute, what did you just say?
Which makes me think all of that talk was just covered so you could defund the Spring Street project.
We really don't need
That's
to be-
unacceptable. That was not the
Not
intent. That was not our, that was not.
I said it makes me think that. That could be wrong.
I'd like to say one thing. All the meetings are audio, video. They're on your council's page, they're on YouTube, and they're on Facebook.
And let me say, there's multiple meetings, and sometimes there's conversations individually. And, you try to remember, but we have official meetings for the official meetings, but there's a number of meetings we've had, a number of conversations we've had.
Am I correct in saying, so I know I missed the last budget workshop.
And
there's
I'm
some
going to
missing
add,
pieces.
I've missed some too, so there may be a conversation I'm
There's
not
some
aware of at
missing
public
pieces.
meetings.
Yeah, but the last when we met last before the last meeting, that was a bad way to say that, but 2 meetings ago on the budget, I remember there being consensus with the 1.28 number coming from the general fund surplus for the entire design of the project and then the first portion, which is the Claysburg area.
Right.
Is that correct?
That
So
was
Yeah,
what
I'm gonna
I
say-
thought was going to
that was what was
additional
generally agreed
appropriation
upon,
tonight.
and
Right.
edit has nothing to do with that.
Right.
I tell you, I was not party to that conversation. I think I came late, and Dustin told me that that was a conversation. Last one I heard was $1 million. That was the only one I heard, but I know it was late to a meeting, and Dustin did mention that to me, that
And then once we moved away from that, we talked about needing to cut the budget for an extra $800,000.
Yes.
And I made the comment that I didn't think the budget was that fat. And another comment was made that, there was $450,000 in edit, and we could find other money through the raises and the additional employees, in the budget. And, the answer was found in 10 minutes. And now we're $511,000 in the hole, and we're not touching the edit dollars, and I shouldn't have missed a meeting, but I don't know how we got from point A to point B.
I think the main thing is that no one appropriated the edit dollars. No one wanted to pull the trigger on using edit dollars for health, to
I think-
throw it in health.
And I agree with that line of
Scott,
thinking.
Okay, I think
We can
that's
go through
why.
and start chopping the budget if we have to, but
I think Scott was including the
We're
edit
trying to
dollars
be fair.
in his cuts, was he not?
In his cuts, he was. When we
Okay.
talked
And that's why
about,
we got really close to that
Right.
number we were looking
when we
for.
spoke separately, the 450 was included to be used somehow for health insurance.
And he had other suggests, I think, like the additional supplies, like maybe with the animal shelter. There were several other different things that he said we should look
that's
at.
where we're at a loss, because he has the list, he's not here.
There was a lot of different funds in that list.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what was
Not
concerned.
always, not all of
General.
those funds are allowed to spend on healthcare.
And when we
Right.
met
That's
separately,
part of that.
we had that discussion about which funds were non-reverting funds that you couldn't really cut and have revenue to use. But I don't know.
Okay. All right. Thank you for catching me up. Okay.
Callie, they did put the 10,000 in for Oak Park.
I saw that. Thank you.
The next, on to page 3. The next thing that I saw was 100,000 cut out of the police department's overtime budget.
Yes, to the 800,000, and I had a conversation with the chief, and he knows that that was just to get us to the 800,000 with the full acknowledgement. Everybody that was here at the workshop knows that it's like even with the fire department, that we would have to do an additional appropriation towards the end of the year when it's needed.
But I guess my frustration with that philosophy is, why would we short them in the first place? Just to know that they're going to have to come ask for additional money?
Well,
I
I'm
mean,
hoping they won't have to, because they get 600,000.
Part of that discussion was the chief talked about this being an unusual year with injuries and the type of injuries that were sustained.
The chief was here?
At once, it was at city council meeting that I think he spoke.
That was Chief Hedrick. We're talking police.
I'm talking
Okay,
police.
I'm sorry, see, I'm getting confused between.
Chief Kavanaugh gave me the impression that he didn't understand why 100,000 was cut when we just negotiated raises, not only to the base, but raises in shift differential and in rank, which is going to have a high impact on overtime rates. But he expressed frustration to me about this contract that we just negotiated, which I thought we were all okay with, but he was frustrated because after doing that, now we've cut overtime.
Well, I'll tell you right now that I'm frustrated, because I just had a conversation with all the department heads Tuesday after our workshop. And he did not say that. He was in total understanding. He says, be under the understanding that with whatever, that I might have to come back. And I said that we were under that understanding. We're just trying to get to the 800,000. He didn't express any frustration, and I talked to him twice after that, and he never said a word. I just said I wanted to make sure you realize what was being done, and
What is,
so apparently he's telling me one thing and you another.
And me.
I can't
He
speak to
complained to me
that.
as well.
Huh?
He complained to me as well about it.
I wonder what the difference is between Chief Kavanaugh coming and asking for an additional later, between that and us having to provide for an additional for health insurance later. because both are unknowns, they're both moving targets. The only difference I see here is a department head's going to have to come ask, and, you know, potentially look like he can't manage his budget. Well, if he had what he originally asked for, maybe he could. And we may, if we give him everything he asked for, he still may have to come back. It's, I mean, overtime is a moving target, just like the health insurance is. I think, I just didn't see the difference in those two funds, which, regardless of where the 100,000 came from.
So if we're putting it in special projects, we may spend it, it may not be there.
And that was another
But the
90,000.
council controls the special projects, and we wouldn't spend it unless we needed it.
Unless there's a fundraiser we gotta go to, I mean, or we gotta buy a table for, I mean, it's, we spend that money all the time.
Okay, allocate it, and then there's another 100,000 we have to come up with, that's fine. Just a philosophy, I mean, that's fine.
Justin skipped ahead on me. I didn't understand the budgeting of $90,000 for a council slush fund over police overtime or over revenue, you know, the budget being over 500,000 or,
90,000.
that's what I was told.
Oh, special
Oh,
projects. is the same,
50,000.
50,000.
Oh, okay. Well, I was told wrong then. I got a text after the last workshop saying that's what we had done, is that we had put 90,000 in a council
We
special
never put
projects
90,000 in
fund.
special projects. We kept it the same as last year, because I did the budget worksheet.
Okay,
Page 7 shows it's 55.
well,
We never even
Justin
discussed
skipped
it.
ahead. I didn't look yet. It's your
Hawkins
fault.
did mention that during what he was saying at the last meeting, that is what his intent was.
Said it, but you all didn't vote on it.
Correct.
Well, because I think
Okay.
what...
Well, that's good then.
If,
I wanna
well,
support
what
it.
it was, I think if all his numbers worked out right at the beginning, there was like almost 50,000 left over, and we said, okay, why don't we, if there is something left over, we can park that little bit in special, council special project, and then we'll move it as needed. But that never materialized because we were still short after all those items were considered. It was just again, a philosophy that he mentioned that was never a real number.
Good deal.
I also feel like in Scott's calc, and I know he's not here, I hate to keep bringing up things that he said without him being here, but correct me if I'm wrong, but the only position that's funded in here is the fire apparatus mechanic, correct? That's the only position that's still in this budget?
Yes.
And I remember,
Shifting in the parts.
and I believe when Scott was going through his line item, he didn't have cutting all but one salary. I think he still had several positions that he was anticipating
I don't even know what.
being included. So at the end of that workshop, I thought, talked extensively about 2 or 3 positions that we thought were justified. So I think he didn't, so I don't know where that disconnect is either, so. When you say shift in parks, can you clarify?
That was the general labor for the leader reasons.
Okay.
The only changes that I made were the ones that you all made mentions on.
And so there was a lot of discussion at the last meeting, but where we ended up going down, what we boiled it down to is actually going, budget by budget, page by page, and saying yes to this, no to this, or increase that or decrease that. That was the only way to kind of keep the whole thing moving forward.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was a lot of discussions in between that time that there was not a motion, or motion failed, or motion changed.
Heather and I spoke today. Obviously, at the last meeting, we talked about this in other business, and so council's not inclined to do that. It seems like me, the options that you have is either $511,000 to cut. Don't budget the $511,000 and do additional appropriations next year. You need to cover the insurance. The other option is that you can increase in the general fund, increase estimated revenue for next year by 511,000. Right now, you're at 30, your estimated revenue is like $32.2 million. Is that right? Which $511,000 is less than 2%. So you're going to get $511,000 more in revenue next year. It's probably not too far off, especially when
We've inflated our estimated revenues before, the council has, and it just seems, I'd rather be conservative rather than,
well,
and I don't know where those estimated revenues came from. I mean,
those are really the only options you have. I mean, you can sit here and talk about, pennies here and there, but at the end of the day, you got a $511,000 shortfall.
Or-
Well, to use the edit dollars, those are the options you really have, or a combination thereof, I guess you could say.
Or we can stay with the request of the administration, which was $6 million, and not move that healthcare insurance line up $800,000.
Well, that's what I'm saying, you could just not budget the 511, you could take the 511 out of health, and that's an option that you have as well. But,
Well, and this isn't necessarily favorable either, but if we're considering 1.28 for the Spring Street project, then maybe we decrease that by 450,000 since we can use edit dollars for the Spring Street project, which would free up 450,000 in our general fund.
We have $7 million in the general fund.
because
But I'm just saying, if we're trying to keep it as,
Well, I
the
thought
Spring Street project isn't
so
in the
now
budget.
I'm really confused. I thought the $1 million was coming out of reserves for a
Right.
Spring Street project.
That's not in the budget.
I'm combining multiple things, aren't I?
here's the thing, if for some reason, say you increase your estimated revenue by 511,000, that doesn't happen. It's not like you have the money there. You're going to be ending next year with, under your all's proposed budget, $6.5 million. That's not counting $450,000 over edit that's going to be unappropriated in this budget, which you will have control over. So it's appropriated, so it's,
I thought that's what we were doing, but after this workshop, I don't know what we're doing.
I'm just,
Well, and
If I don't want to pass a deficit budget,
when the revenues were discussed, Heather did mention that they were conservative projections, so that is,
I think Heather's sticking with her numbers. Correct?
Yeah, I, like you said, I stick with conservative revenues.
Yeah.
But
It's-
you all have past history on the revenue sheets that you can say, well, let's change that number to something else.
And also to point out, I'm not sure if this budget does not take into account any increase in income tax.
Correct.
We're going to have an increase. We just did not reflect the increase because 2020.
It's
We're
going to
gonna lose
shift.
some of that increase because
We can't raise our income tax budgets because of the shift to the county.
that's,
We're going to start bringing in less or not see the increases.
Yeah, less, it's not, you're not bringing less, right? It's just,
It's not
the
gonna
increase
see
isn't
the
gonna be as much.
Yeah.
so actually, the money you're going to be coming out, you're going to be receiving on income tax next year is going to be higher
Absolutely.
than what,
It's under the cabinet,
yeah.
this 9 million for.
Budget has very specific purposes.
No, the cabinet
Oh, it could be
portion
anything.
that goes into the general fund. can be
I see, I'm sorry.
General fund,
I heard Cadget, and I was
Right,
thinking our
yeah,
Cadget.
cabinet certified shares and property tax replacement.
it's just in 2020, you're going to, we'll take a look at it.
we make our situation really simple and just and right if we just don't budget the $800,000 over the $6 million for the health care. And if we watch the trends until after the circuit breakers, that solves the deficit budget problem. That we've created.
Heather, if we encourage you to increase the revenue projections by the deficit 511, can you determine where that should come from, or does that just strictly come from the property tax? Are there other funds that are part of that?
Would just be the general
It's
fund,
just the
wouldn't it?
general, so that would be property tax, correct?
No, the
There's
general
some-
fund has many different
Funding sources,
revenue streams.
Okay.
building permits, zoning, yeah, like building permits and, I mean, everything.
The first page of the revenue sheet that you have.
Got on my book.
This page.
Blue page?
Well, not that page.
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
okay.
Yeah, I remember. Got it. So I guess my question is, if we say our direction would be to increase the revenue as is one of the choices that Les mentioned, is that direction for you to be able to do that, or, okay. Then I'd make a motion that that's the direction we go.
Are you saying that you will change the number, or you will just change it on the sheet?
I can change the miscellaneous revenues,
Well,
the
question.
DLGF will then, use to set the budgets.
Right, but you're not saying that you're going to change your budget estimate, what you think we're going to come,
It will
or are you?
Well,
Seems like
Yeah.
it
she
would
asked
be
her.
easier for me to keep them all consistent.
we're just changing numbers.
So on
it's
your
balanced.
account balance,
You see the difference, you see what I'm asking?
Because here's what's going on.
Your number is what you think our number's going to be. You will change it in the packet based on our directions. What, that answer, the answer to this question is that. You're not changing your opinion of what our estimate is.
So a
right,
couple
you
hundred
all
thousand probably will come
tell
in
me
more.
what you'd like.
I don't know if it'll be 500,000 or 600,000, 100,000.
Because the responsibility is going to be on us if we
Because the way our
do
budget
that.
is,
That's where I'm.
but moving parts, we don't know
Well,
exactly
the
what that is going to be.
revenues come in low, then
We're so
it
big. Oh, that's my point, is
You
$200,000.
would be able to watch that trend.
Nathan's got a motion.
Are there any negative consequences, like,
Nobody seconded it.
I mean, if the DLGF is looking at, are they going to be alarmed by that differing estimation?
No, they are strictly, put the number in the box, the formula work, if there's still money in it, go. They decide, they don't take any policy decisions.
Right. If we budgeted the $7 million in reserves, as long as that came out as at zero and not negative, they would be fine with it.
So Nathan, was your thinking, are we budgeting for the health insurance increase or not budgeting for the health?
No, yes.
Yes.
Our dilemma is we either cut our expenses or increase our revenue, as Les said. And the consensus of the council was to include the health insurance as an expense. Don't cut it, include that, because it's going to be the expense. So on the other side of that coin is then increase the revenue. And I asked Heather, in the funds that make up that, can she divide it out and say, yeah, I'll do it this way, or does she want us to do that? And she said that she could do that.
Yeah, I know that because this is part of my job of the interest on investments.
Right.
I have in here for next year at $150,000 for revenue. Last year, it was almost $300,000. So.
And that's where you were
I am
conservative, right?
conservative, yes.
Sure.
I can increase that to another $150,000.
That's why I asked you if you could do it, because you know how you came up with those,
Right.
and that would solve the problem.
Yes.
And you feel comfortable with that?
Whatever your direction would be.
So you think you can find $511,000?
Well, I'm looking right
Just gotta put it
now.
down there and hope it comes in, but it's probably not gonna, it may or may not.
$1 million in there, it doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, she's saying the CADRA distribution, there's 250,000 if we're looking at this year's actual compared to what we're estimated. So she would just make our actuals last year what we're estimating this year instead of being conservative, and then that's where the money comes from. Am I correct?
And if we don't want to do that, it's fine. I'm just trying to move us along. So
Well, and yeah, I mean, if we look at just the property tax fund alone, well,
How about if we split the
All right.
difference and reduce the health insurance? Dustin's sure we're not gonna hit 6.8. I don't know if that's true or not, but it is a moving target based on trends. What if we reduce that by a couple $100,000 and increase revenue by a couple $100,000 or 250,000, make some round number, and then there's the 500,000. And if health insurance moves favorably, it's not a problem. If it doesn't, then we'd have to use the 450 or some other reserves or something to pay the difference.
so,
I mean, it's not what the experts told us we should use, but some people are pretty optimistic on the council here that we're not going to need all that money on the health insurance.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Report.
Just moving numbers around.
It's not.
That's what we do. Based on estimates. We don't know, doesn't know.
The motion was to increase revenues by 511,702,
Well, I thought he said too about lower.
but that wasn't the motion.
Oh,
The motion was to raise.
Okay,
He didn't get a
Yeah,
second.
We didn't get a second.
So that's off the table.
okay, all right.
Nobody.
For lack of second.
Got it.
Yeah.
Bill's from like a second.
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion, we reduce our health insurance line item to 6.5 million, so that's $300,000 less, and increase our revenue line item by 200,000 to make up the difference for the deficit. But the idea that, we may wake up and have to allocate more money for health insurance next year.
do we need to do $211,702?
Yes, whatever it takes to zero it out. I mean, 200, whatever way you need to go.
I guess well, you can get a second.
That's the motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? It fails for lack of a second.
And my comment was going to be, the professionals, they came back and they said it's going to be 800,000. They feel pretty sure of that. So that's a pretty, well, I'll just accept that at face value. And then our controller says that the figures are pretty conservative, gave some examples. So it seems like there's more give on that side than the health care expense side when you're putting it on a weight or a scale. And that's why I would, if we need to cut a little out of health care, I could maybe do a small amount, but I'd rather go the other way than
What
Yeah.
professionals came back and said?
folks from Humana.
So Olson
and-
and Cindy Olson,
our
Cindy
health
with the,
insurance.
yeah.
We have an insurance committee that met,
The agent,
an HR.
the company, and the committee was there. Yeah, I mean,
Isn't that number 125% number?
No.
No,
The $800,000 number was at 90.
92%
of the 125%.
Right.
of what
So
could
that's,
happen.
and we used the one,
I'm sorry.
and under what guidance are we using the 125% worst case scenario? Is that something?
We're not,
that is the max, our
the
exposure
worst
we
case
have.
scenario was like 950,000. There was a third number that we were given that was the absolute worst case scenario that was like, or 1.2, it was like a much larger number.
Right, and that,
That's your maximum exposure.
Yes.
right, because parts of, but it also does not
We're not using
contemplate additional employees. So every time a new employee happens, which we're going to add at least one, maybe
Well-
two, it also moves a little bit.
What I'm saying is that we're just using our maximum exposure
No.
number.
No,
We're
we're
not.
not.
92%.
We're only using,
Hold on, let me finish. We're using our maximum exposure number, taking 92% of that, and then saying this is what experts say our number is going to be.
No. Yes, the number is 92%, but it's not pulled out of the air. It's because of the trending of the claims. That's how they came to that number, 92%.
Okay.
It's that, we don't always budget to 92% of 125%. It's based on 3 and 5 year claim projections.
But they also told us that we had some extraordinary events this year.
high claims.
We went from 90% to 92%, is that right? Like typically we do 90% of 125?
Or
Heather,
for some reason,
Doesn't matter.
88% is sticking in my mind, but I could be.
Could I say
I think
something?
it was 88.
I know it was an increase.
Heather, do you predict us to have a surplus in our general fund next year? I think we've got, what, a 7 million surplus this year?
Yes.
Well, why don't we just forget about the increase in insurance, and then next year, when it comes due, take the money out of our surplus and pay whatever it needs to be?
Agreed.
That was what I was trying to say.
And then what are y'all gonna do if that's your mentality when the reserves are gone?
I agree, that is a very easy fix, and we could do that. But what you're doing is basically saying, okay, we're $800,000 short next year in the budget for operating expenses. And then what's been happening the last couple of years, and I think it will happen again, could be wrong, we add some employees, cost of insurance goes up, all of a sudden now it's $1.5 million. So we don't have to find 800,000 plus 700,000. We're going to have to find $1.5 million. We're going to go in reserves $1.5 million next year. I mean, it perpetuates.
I thought that was the trouble the council got in right before I came on council.
It is. That's exactly what
That's
happened.
why, okay.
Well, and that was the
Well-
problem that happened when you and I were on the council.
So it's a quick fix.
I
But if the
think-
trends continue, it's a dilemma, a major dilemma.
I think what Mr. Ellis said was,
The trends are that every year we've appropriated more and more for health insurance, and every year our surplus continues to grow anyway. That's the trend. I mean, we can look at data every single way there is to look at it and make 100 different arguments.
So we added 1.48
That-
million to our surplus this year, correct? If I'm looking at the 12-line statement.
What now?
Like, it's the amount appropriated less any reductions in appropriations, is that correct?
Which letter at the top? Are you looking, you're looking at the...
12.
Yes, so I'm looking at how much did our general fund
Increase?
increase in surplus funds this past year? Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out how much is typically added to the general fund,
We had $6,804,267.
and now we have 7.1.
Yes.
So it's like 300. Oh, it's the difference that hasn't been accumulated.
But that 7.1 is after we did the 1.2 million.
Right.
We've done a number of, the additional appropriations this
Right.
year, $1,487,000.
That's what I was looking at. So that's the amount that we have, okay.
So
So it's like 1.8 million.
So we've appropriated 1.4 above the budget this year, and we're still in the black.
By 300.
which it goes back to, Matt said that we've increased the insurance, we've had to add insurance every year, but also our revenue has increased every year. And that's exactly what we're asking, what we talked about asking Heather to do, increase our insurance and increase our revenue. So, I mean,
But I
That's
think
what
what
you
you're
said.
asking her is to increase them over what she's already,
Increase them.
is that
And-
accurate?
yes.
Do I understand that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she said
We can
do that, and we could have done that last year. To go back to what Councilperson Owen said, we had our projections for revenue last year, and we exceeded them, and we've done that for the last few years.
Which is
So-
why we keep adding a
Right.
balance to our surplus.
So that's,
Okay. It's a horse
however
race.
we
We're
deal
arguing
with
about
it.
the same
Yeah.
thing.
Make a
I
motion.
did, it failed.
Oh,
Make it
we'll
again.
I make a motion to have Heather increase the revenue projections by $515,000.
Second.
I got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I don't feel comfortable voting in favor of just moving the numbers around because it fits what we want it to be. So I'll be voting against that motion until I see some kind of, until I have time to review 12-line statement in our bank sheets to see if that's a reasonable thing to ask the controller to do.
I personally ain't gonna support because I don't feel, they can laugh all they want, I don't feel comfortable not budgeting the numbers that we have in this budget just because we have reserves. So that's where I stand. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
It's 7 o'clock.
I'd like a roll call vote, please.
Roll call.
Just wait just a second, please. Our roll calls have to be recorded now, so that's why it's taking a minute. Councilperson White,
No?
Councilperson Sestavny.
Yes?
Councilperson Yon.
No.
Councilperson Owen.
No.
Councilperson Samuel.
Oh, yes.
Councilperson Ellis.
No.
Council President Gill.
No.
5 noes, 2 yeses. So
The motion fails. All right, it's a few minutes till 7, so I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to have to adjourn before we start the council meeting, so I have got to go through the restroom.
Well, we've got to have,
Apparently, I don't know,
I adjourn.
Motion.
motions, meeting's adjourned.